Good afternoon and welcome to Funny Like a Clown podcast. I am your host, Dennis Wirth out of Beantown, baby. This is episode 16 of Funny Like a Clown podcast, March 17th, 2019. We will be discussing George Carlin today, and to do that, I have on the phone Boston comedian Sarah Martin. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being on, and I have to mention that Funny Like a Clown podcast is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce for the spicy, sweet, savory taste at game time. There is only one G Vegas available at gvegas.webs.com. But I asked you what comedian you want to discuss, Sarah, and you chose George Carlin. What made you choose him?
He's a classic. He's, one of the comedians that I've always looked up to and grew up listening to, and I think it's very important today because all of the censorship questions that are going on, I feel like George Carlin should be rolling in his grave.
Yeah, it seems everybody's offended by something nowadays, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what's your favorite memory of George, of all his comedy routines or bits that he did? What's your favorite memory of him?
Well, my favorite, obviously like the 7 words you can't say on TV, but
right.
I loved him in Dogma as well.
Dogma, yeah, that was one of the classic films, right? That was what? That was the girl bounty hunter, right?
No, that was the Jay and Silent Bob, the Kevin Smith movie, where they're basically just spoofing on Catholicism.
Oh, okay. So, was he one of the comics that inspired you to want to do comedy, or?
He definitely is a factor in there, and then it just was, getting more and more into comedy. It's like, oh, how do I write like that? Because you see,
he set the bar for sure.
Is like super squeaky clean on late night TV.
Yeah.
And like he had a career before he turned into like Carlin, you know.
You wonder how he did. You'd be watching him and just get mesmerized. Like, how does he do that? How does he put the perfect words together to really make you think about comedy? You know.
Yeah, no, that's the great part. It's like never thought about it that way. But it made it palatable, too, because, it was definitely in a time where you couldn't talk about religion like that.
Oh, not nowadays you couldn't, no. Right, he was one of those comics who broke the rules back then and set the pavement for the rest of them to really break the rules then, right?
Yeah.
All right, so George Carlin, known for his black comedy, which is known as dark humor, and reflections on politics, the English language, psychology, religions, and various taboo subjects. And as you know, me and you both do comedy, and I hear from a lot of the veteran comics that the 3 subjects you don't want to touch in comedy are race, religion, and disease. You'll get booed off stage if you touch any of those, where, because you can't make fun of someone's religion, and, disease, you can't make fun of someone with cancer unless you have cancer, because then you're making fun of yourself, but you can't make fun of somebody else. And race, that's just not an acceptable thing, but did you find, are those any subject you touch, or do you try to stay away from those?
It depends on the crowd. For me, I know that I have some things that kind of delve a little bit into, politics. I was recently actually asked by a rabbi to do a show, and I was like, well, I'm not Jewish, but also, I don't really talk much about religion, just because, I didn't grow up with any, so it's not really, I don't feel like it's my place to make fun of it then.
Right.
But, no, I think crowds get super uptight the second you mention any of that, and there is a way to tell it, as long as it's funny,
Sure. Because I had a routine back when it was on George Carlin. I was, how hard could I bash George Carlin under a minute, and half the crowd would roar if they like that side, but you got to figure them, half the crowd, they're a fan of, not George Bush, I'm sorry, it was George Bush, and man, that political humor, I had to drop the routine because some nights it would go over and other nights they'd be flipping me off and booing me, they really, politics is a tough subject.
That way, yeah.
Every night's different, but Carlin, he was really able to put the words, where, like rape. He said rape was one thing you can't make funny, you can't joke about rape, there's no way you could make it funny, and George Carlin's tape was, well, what if Porky Pig raped Daffy Duck? What do you think of that? And he found a way to make it funny, where other comedians, they wouldn't even attempt to do it, so,
Yeah, he wasn't going for just the shock value is the thing. There was a point behind it, and it was done just thoughtfully.
Right, more political to make you think about it, right?
Yeah, just like to be able to get away with saying that word. Like, no, it was actually challenging the idea of it, and that's what I like about that. Because I mean, how many comics do you see in the scene that it's like they're trying to just be the next edgy person, so they add in a word that's maybe unnecessary, or maybe they're just, you know, it's too early in their career to be able to delve into that and know the right words to say it. Like, once they get on a show or something, like, you can't just be the next Carlin. Like,
they think they're being edgy and they're coming off looking filthy, right?
Yeah, no, it's not that I'm a clean comedian. I spent the weekend trying to do, like, cleaner shows, and it was funny because, like, I walked into the green room at Improv Boston, and one of the comics on the show, Sam Pelletier, was like, "If you're on the clean show?" Like, yeah, I know. It's going to start off great that way.
But you got to stay true to who you are. I mean, if that's not who you are in real life, it's tough to portray that, on a comedy show.
Yeah, no, I think it's different though. Like, everyone's definition of clean is different.
Right.
Because like I had to do a show a while back that had to be like TV-14 rating essentially. So I had to look up the definition of what the hell that meant.
Yeah.
And it was like, how many swears can you get away saying? Like, how many bitches can you say? Like,
well, but you know as well as I do, you work a whole lot more in comedy if you can work clean. You're working twice the gigs as if you were dirty.
Oh, for sure. No, if you're able to do it without swears and more like innuendos and in-your-face sort of comedy, then you can get those corporate gigs. You can get the, like, cruise ship gigs, all the,
So, all right. So George Carlin, as you mentioned, his most popular routine was the 7 dirty words routine. And that routine gave the FCC power to regulate indecent material on public airwaves, and that was approved by the Supreme Court. I mean, what would you think if one of your comedy routines actually made it to the Supreme Court where they were deciding something on it? What would be your first thought?
That would be my intro forever.
That's quite the credit to your name, isn't it?
Yeah. This next one, that's insane though. Like, that you literally could not say that. What were the 7 words?
All right. Here were the 7 words, which now, when I read these myself, half of them, they're starting to get away with on late night TV. The original were shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. And as George Carlin said, tits shouldn't even be in there, but I mean, I know on Spike TV, if you watch Spike TV late at night, they're starting to say the word shit on there, and they're getting away with it, so, I mean...
Yeah, I think Comedy Central's been able to say it with South Park for a while, too.
Yeah, so they're certainly starting to break the rules that they set through, but I mean, Carlin was breaking these rules back in the 70s, where, I mean, nowadays we've come a long way, but like you said, the Lenny Bruce's, he got arrested after shows for doing some of his materials where you couldn't get away with the stuff we did nowadays.
Yeah, no, and that would be considered clean.
Yeah, right nowadays, right? People come up with it. But he was a frequent on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he hosted the absolute first Saturday Night Live ever show. Did you know that about him?
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, the first one ever. He was the host of. He was ranked the number 2 comic of all time by Rolling Stone magazine and Comedy Central, behind Richard Pryor. Record 14 HBO specials, and I don't want to name them all, but the ones I remember: Class Clown, A Place for My Stuff, Jammin' in New York City, You're All Diseased, It's Bad for You. But what was one of his comedy albums that really you got into listening to?
I think I've just heard like a collaboration of all of them, because I didn't necessarily like get an album. You know what I mean? I didn't.
His overall work more.
Yeah, it was just kind of like on TV or something, or clips of it here and there. Like, I don't think I got the full experience growing up, but I definitely, it was like one of the first comedians I knew who was like a comedian, besides, like Robin Williams or whatever.
Right. So those were all, his clips were all stuff we grew up on, but he didn't have such a success with his movies. I mean, some of his bigger movies in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Scary Movie 3, Tarzan, and Cars. Now, do you think that's why Richard Pryor, he had so much success in movies, not just stand-up? That was why he was number 1 over Carlin?
I mean, Richard Pryor really broke the mold there, too, because it was stories about his life that he made it mainstream, too, like he made that, he just made the most painful stories turn into the funniest stories, and made it into the mainstream, so people were like, oh, we got to see this guy.
They could relate to it, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, Pryor did it both in comedy albums and in movies, where Carlin, he was more the comedy album genius. The movies, they really weren't his big hits.
Yeah, no, that's like the reason why I think anybody wants to record an album now, you know?
Right. That's your safety net right there. Okay. Let's see. I got a few fan questions here. You want me to read off a few questions from the fans, and you can just comment on them? How's that sound?
Sure.
All right. Andy LaBelle writes in, the top 1% is in the big club, and you ain't in it. So, I mean, have you ever had a moment where you had a younger comic trying to tell you what to do, and you just want to tell them, hey, you know, you do what I've done in comedy, then you come back and talk to me, you know?
All the time. Yeah.
All the time. That's a frequent for me, too, you know? It's like people telling me how to do stuff just starting in comedy. It's like, you pull off what I've done, then come back and talk to me. But, let's see. Johnny Gould.
I just roll with it. Just roll with
yeah,
it.
what can you really say? You know, when you're a young comic, you don't want to listen. You think you know everything. And looking back, I was probably like that when I started, too. I needed some veteran comics to put me in my place back then. But, what do we got? Johnny Goulding writes in, baseball versus football. Do you remember that routine?
Baseball versus football. Okay. I don't think I can come up with that routine specifically. Do you remember how it goes?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I do remember listening to the routine, and I remember the comparisons between the two. Where George, he could make anything, you know, whether it was political or he'd really make you think about it. I do remember that. Let's see, Drew Gormley, he wrote in, it was long but interesting, and I wanted to read it. When I was a kid, using the full-size adult earphones was a big deal. My dad thought I would break them, and I'd slip them on and listen to his Carlin records when I was homesick from school. Impossible to describe the feeling of liberation that came from doing this. Time-traveling explosion of much-needed truths. Hearing a huge audience laugh and scream with the joy at his incredible subversive humor made me look deeper and think. I'm grateful to a higher power for to shoot me with the funny ray from the future. I mean, would you say Carlin, he was so ahead of his time, just making you think about his comedy, do you think?
Sorry, the phone went out right in the middle of your question.
Oh, I'm saying George Carlin, he was so ahead of his time in making you think about the comedy.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's one of the groundbreaking, like, rule breakers, essentially, and that's, yeah, definitely ahead of his time. I mean, that's why it was even brought up in the Supreme Court and all of that. Like,
yeah, because he wasn't just making you laugh. He was really making you think about some subjects that people were talking about at the time.
Right, it was just real. It's not that people weren't talking about these things. They just felt like they couldn't have a public forum for it, too, I'm sure.
Right. Let's see. Amy T writes in, pre-comedy coming face-to-face with him and being starstruck. So, have you ever been on the comedy scene and met a comic and just been absolute awe of being standing next to him?
Yeah, no, that happened this weekend.
Who'd you meet?
Gilbert Gottfried was at the Northeast Comic-Con, and, like, there was, you know, we were doing stand-up comedy in the other room, and it was literally Gilbert sitting at the end of the hall. And it's like, what are we even trying to do here? Like, yeah, come see the comedy show for a bunch of comics that you've never heard of because there's Gilbert Godfrey at the end of the hall.
Right.
Signing photographs.
Got him in the door, though, didn't it, right?
Yeah. It's just like one of those things where I was like, all right, like, do I wave hi? Do I acknowledge it? Do I just walk by? Like, he's there, you know, for, like, the fan experience. And I'm like, I don't want to be that asshole, and then I just get overwhelmed sometimes. So I'm like, nope, I'm just going to go to the bar.
Well, I was like that. I did a show on television, The Comedy Kitchen, which you were a guest on, and my first big star I had on was Steve Sweeney, and I go back and watch that episode. I was so thrilled to have the guy standing next to me. I was actually goofy just on the show, but I mean, it was, you have to realize they're the same people as you, you know? You watch these people on TV and they're standing next to you, and you don't even realize they're human after a while.
Yeah, no, it's weird because it's like one of those things where you feel like you know them already because you've seen their work, but they have no fucking clue who you are.
Yeah, right.
I don't want to be super fangirl and be like, you know me, because they don't. So, yeah, no.
But they don't mind meeting you. You think you're gonna be a bother. All right. Neil Fogel writes in, golf is a waste of precious real estate. Now there's one you'd think about from Carlin right there. He was talking about golf, where most people, he's like, it's a waste of real estate. It's a game, but
very valid point.
yeah, there you go. Rodney Wirth, no relation to me. He writes in, the Carlin show Fox did in the mid-'90s. I never watched the show, but I do remember he had his own TV show called The Carlin Show. Did you watch any episodes of that or no?
No, I didn't get the privilege to see a lot of it. Like I said,
yeah, he wasn't known for his TV or movies. It was more his stand-up was his big go-to thing, and that's what we all remember him for. But did you ever see him live?
I know I didn't get to. Because when did he pass away?
When did he pass away? Don't tell me I know this. He passed away in 2008, age 71.
Yeah, I didn't get the chance to, but it's literally the year I started doing comedy, too, so it's like one of those things
Right.
that is like, yeah, I bet I'll see him one day, because he wasn't that old either.
Right,
so you don't think about that.
I'm a big fan of Sam Kinison, and I must have spent $10,000 collecting memorabilia from him. I never saw him live. I was too young before I started going to comedy shows, but you can be so touched by just the albums you listen to that they turn into one of your heroes. I did see George Carlin about a month before he died at Hampton Beach Casino Ballroom, and he was hunched over, and he never moved during the whole show, but he was still funny as hell. As old as he was, he still brought it, and yeah, and you want to hear a funny one about him? I didn't know this till I read it. He requested that after he died, that his ashes be spread in front of various nightclubs and venues that he played in L.A. and New York. So did you know that every time you hit a popular comedy club in New York, that his ashes were spread in front of that club, probably?
That and a lot of homeless people's pee, but yeah.
Well, one of the two. That's a heck of a request, though, I thought,
That's super cool, though. That's super cool.
Who would think about doing that?
Yeah, you are standing in the same spot as him then. Because, when you walk into any of those clubs in New York or whatever, they have all the pictures of all the comedians.
Yeah.
Just, spread across the walls. And you're like, oh, were they really here? Or, were they here once and now you want to claim that? I don't know.
Well, even we know. I mean, we do a lot of shows in the Boston scene, and years ago, Dane Cook, he was hitting the same small stages that we performed on before he hit it big, and it gets tough.
Yeah.
We're performing on the same stage Dane Cook. It's tough to believe, but same way for Carlin in New York, I'd imagine. He had a history of heart attacks spanning 3 decades. One came in '78, one in '82, and one in '91. He had an operation in 2003. He had significant heart failure in 2005. Then finally, as we said, in 2008, at the age of 71, he passed away in Santa Monica, California. But what was your first thought when you heard that Carlin had passed away?
He's that old, and you wouldn't picture him being someone who had, a lot of heart problems. He wasn't a big guy. But I guess he's a little angry, but yeah.
You can picture a guy my size having a heart attack because I'm a big dude, right? But Carl, you're right. He looked in shape, but I mean, I guess it's genetic and a history of family. But what was the first thought that went through your head when you heard Carlin has passed?
Just sucks.
Yeah, we lost one of the great ones, right?
Yeah, no, that totally sucks. It's one of those feelings that's just I never even got the chance to go see that live.
To see one of your heroes, right?
That
happened to me up to Foxwoods Casino. There was a bill. Don Rickles and Joan Rivers was performing together, and it's
God.
I was so busy, and I'm like, you know what? I'll catch them the next time they come around. Not thinking there wasn't going to be a next time, and I'm so mad at myself I didn't go. They both ended up passing away, and I had a chance, and I blew it to see 2 legends like that. But that's why you do it now, folks. There is no tomorrow. You never know what's going to happen. You got to do it now in comedy, but. What's going on in your comedy career, Sarah? What can you let the fans know? Where can they check you out? What do you got going on?
You can check me out on my website at sarahmartincomedy.com. You can follow any social media links or whatever from there. But I got a lot of shows coming up. April's pretty busy. This week I'm headed to Albany, and then I'm coming back and I'll be in Worcester for the weekend at the Comedy Attic.
So traveling's part of comedy. That's what we got to do, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm like, my check engine light just came on, so I was like, oh goody, we'll deal with this today.
That's Carlin saying hi to you. You got your check engine light coming on. Well, all right. We end off every show with some trivia. You want some George Carlin trivia?
I don't know if I'm gonna be good at that.
Well, you know what? To be honest with you, nobody's good at it. Nobody's gone 3 for 3. You're lucky if you get 2. Most people get 1, but let's give it a shot anyway. All right.
All right.
All right. Despite his frequent use of obscenities on stage, Carlin was a regular character on what children's TV show?
What children's TV show? I'm going to go with Sesame Street.
No, Thomas the Tank Engine. He was the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you remember? Well, I was past our time, but Thomas the Tank Engine, I remember my son watched it a lot. I remember his voice, but he was the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine. All right. Who knew?
Yeah. No, Thomas the Tank Engine's clean and shiny.
That's right, and usually you couldn't.
Yes.
If you swear in your gigs, you usually don't get a job like that working on kids shows. But I guess he was so popular. How do you say no to Carlin, right?
Well, right now, look at Bob Saget. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Who knows? Let's see. What Cars character did George provide the voice for? He was in the movie Cars. What was his character's name?
I've never even seen that movie.
Fillmore. He was Fillmore. I never seen it either, but I did know he was one of the Cars. I never saw the movie, but I did know he was in it. Fillmore. All right, and I think you mentioned this one earlier, so you might get this one. What director known for movies like Mallrats and Chasing Amy cast Carlin in 3 of his movies?
Kevin Smith.
Kevin Smith, you got that one. You are 1 for 3. Sarah Martin, I want to thank you so much for being on Funny Like a Clown podcast. It was fun.
Thank you for having me.
And what are your parting words about George Carlin?
Parting words are just try to keep that in mind, I think, as an audience member or as a comedian, that there is a way to tell stuff like that is maybe offensive, but there is a way to tell it that it's funny. So relax.
Relax is good advice. Don't take everything so serious, right? Everybody's so offended by everything nowadays, and Carlin tried to teach you, you don't have to be offended by everything. It's just comedy. It's not meant to hurt you. It's meant to make you laugh. Where will we be without laughter?
Right. Hear the person out at least.
Absolutely.
It's not like he was making anyone feel unsafe.
Right. Everybody's got their point of view, and Carlin had his. All right. Good luck to you in the future, and we'll talk to you soon, Sarah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
All right, comedian Sarah Martin right there on George Carlin, and I gotta say, he not only made you laugh, he made you think. And in my comedy, I do a character called the child support superhero, and as hard as I got people laughing about it, I got them thinking too that, hey, children deserve both of their parents equally. So when you can make people laugh and think, you really hit the next level of comedy. And Carlin, man, the #2 comic of all time, did that. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast. I am your host, Dennis Wirth. Until the next episode, keep laughing, folks. Good night.